You left in a hurry? They came for me. The foreign police? 5 of them. Naturally, you are innocent. I haven't researched To Catch a Thief in years. They think I'm being too negative, don't they? Coincidence can be terrible. These discs all get positive reviews, but you claim to be innocent of bias. I do more than claim. I insist. I can't understand how this video thief can imitate actual film restoration. And someone who knew the technique, maybe somebody in the studio. He picks perfect victims in the right press release terms. Goes grain managing, overprocesses audio, leaves no disc properly encoded, and disappears with your $40. Just like Paramount. You don't believe me. You're as nervous as a cat. If somebody caught this restoration imitator, we'd all be off the hook, surely. The foreign police are chasing the wrong label. Someone's got to chase the right one. One day he'll make a mistake. There's only one answer. I've got to catch this restoration imitator myself. You could not do more than the foreign police. But I could, and I'm the only one who could, because I can anticipate him, figure out his next move, and catch him with his hand in the UHD case. Nobody will believe what you say. Who believes me now? The biggest problem is time. I've got to hit him before he hears that I'm after him. I need better video information, the kind that takes months to dig out. Look, Crusader, hold them. Film restorations. The only thing in the world you can't resist. Ever had a better offer in your whole life? One with everything? I've never had a crazier one. Just as long as you're satisfied. You know as well as I do this 4K master is imitation. Well, it's better than the 2020 Blu-ray abomination. Hello, I'm Dr. Crusader, head of the film department at UDFIC. I'm here to talk you through the latest Paramount screwy master of Alfred Hitchcock's 1955 masterpiece, To Catch a Thief. Let us examine all the myriad of ways Paramount has once again applied their screwy film restoration processes that are extremely destructive in picture and sound to great works of cinematic art. Hello and welcome back to this damn full idealistic crusade. In this video I'll be reviewing the new Paramount UHD and 4K master of Alfred Hitchcock's masterpiece To Catch a Thief from 1955, which was also his first film in the iconic VistaVision process, which should mean this is a stupendous 4K transfer and UHD release, but it's the Paramount Studio label, so of course it isn't. Now, this is ostensibly to make up for their atrocious 2020 Blu-ray, which chose to just completely destroy To Catch a Thief with hideous amounts of digital noise reduction, resulting in the dreaded waxy face effect. And instead of admitting their error, Paramount doubled down on their so-called restoration efforts, and we've been stuck with that disc for 4 years now. Most of us, including myself, avoided it, and we were sticking with the 2012 Blu-ray, which itself was an older master based off of an older interpositive that had been generated sometime in the mid to late 2000s, so not even original elements were being sourced for this. And that disc is very much showing its age. It's not the greatest. It has definite issues of its own, which are only magnified now being upscaled to 4K, but that's all we've had to work with, really, outside of going before that release into the older home video releases, which have a variety of problems of their own. So suddenly Paramount announcing they were bringing out a 4K UHD in the Paramount Presents line was a bit of a surprise, and given their attitude over the 2020 debacle, I assumed they were just going to double down on that terrible disc and give us something similar in the UHD realm. And given their horrifyingly bad UHD of Once Upon a Time in the West, I expected it to have a terrible encode and all the other usual Paramount tomfoolery. Well, I have to say, this disc is an absolute hot mess of a transfer. It also seems like a hot mess of different sources as well. It's hard to quite pinpoint exactly what was done, despite what we've been told in the PR releases. Essentially, it seems as if Paramount went back to the 6K source scans done from VistaVision materials that were used for the 2020 abomination in terms of that Blu-ray disc with all of the grain removal. But they went back to the essentially the color graded and slightly cleaned up files, so they didn't start completely from scratch, but they basically seem to have gone back and started mostly from scratch in terms of taking a already processed version of the files that have been generated from that 6K scan. And then they have used that to make a now Dolby Vision HDR master in 4K resolution. But unfortunately, the results are again, using the phrase hot mess is, I think, the best way to describe the overall presentation of this release. On the surface, this is the most detailed and most beautifully rendered version of the film we've seen on home video, which has a history that dates back all the way to the early 1980s, and not so very good 4:3 transfers of print sources that had color fading and other issues. So that in and of itself is nice to see, but this is, of course, a VistaVision large format title, so one would expect at least some degree of improvement. And frankly, anything would be an improvement over the 2020 Blu-ray, which is, frankly, still and always was atrocious. So overall, in this image, what you should expect is technically the most detailed and most vivid of presentations we've seen, because this is new work being done on newer scans, but they still are the same scans that were used for the 2020 atrocity Blu-ray release and master. But in how it's handled here, you have a transfer that does have inconsistent grain management, certainly on and off throughout, and in some sequences you have a similar effect to what we saw throughout the terrible Godfather 4K masters, of having individual shots and sequences have inconsistent levels of grain management to where they are very obvious when you get to the most managed sections, which have that sort of waxy sheen effect in areas, unfortunately. But the sort of trade-off is you have much more vivid color than what we've seen before, so it is technically an improvement in picture while also having so many constraints from the poor encoding, which is the usual Paramount standard of being not the greatest and averaging in the 40s and 50s in terms of overall megabits per second range, sometimes dropping into the 20s and 30s, which is frankly unforgivable, not just on a feature film UHD, but an Alfred Hitchcock title, specifically his first VistaVision film, and its most famous aspect are its luscious visuals, which won legendary cinematographer Robert Burks his color cinematography Oscar, and a film that's never had a truly great home video release in terms of picture, because there's always been issues before. That's frustrating, to say the least. But the big problem here is we have infamous amounts of the terrible frozen grain halos poking their head in. So there are many moments throughout the entire transfer where you unfortunately have this sort of blocky noise pattern that's also sometimes the actual grain, it seems, of the transfer itself, that is essentially locked around people or places or anything in the frame, and especially if they are moving, it is usually at its most apparent when it sort of locks into place around a person's head and shoulders as they move around. And the skies and big open wide shots are usually the worst offenders, so you can always see bits or examples of this in a lot of Paramount transfers, and To Catch a Thief is sadly no exception. So in addition to the inconsistent grain management that pops up throughout the transfer, there are innumerable frozen grain noise halos throughout, which are not helped by the encode not being very good to begin with. And this being a large format VistaVision film, you should have a disc release that is absolutely maxed in its bit rate and has the utmost care in presenting the video quality as best as it can be, because just to begin with, you've got a large format title you're dealing with, so it's you have to pay a lot more attention to these things. And one would think that an Alfred Hitchcock film of all things could actually get an archival transfer, but unfortunately that doesn't really happen even with the Hitchcock library. Honestly, the frozen grain problem is the biggest issue in this transfer overall, because it is nonstop, it is rampant throughout, and there's hardly a scene or sequence that doesn't have some of this. But when you get to the sections that do not suffer this problem, this is when the transfer is at its best. This is when it resembles what it should look like. It's still not all the way there, because there's still the grain management and the encode isn't the greatest. But this is where you start to get something that feels like a VistaVision title, and more like the release this film should have always gotten in the past and never did. But these moments are few and far between. They are fleeting, and it really boggles the mind why anybody thought this was okay. Then you jump into the strange sort of patchwork effect this master gives, because there are moments where the quality drop-off is such, even in individual scenes and sequences, that it starts to feel like they've mixed in elements of older scans or older video masters, specifically some bits from the horrendously bad 2020 DNR to Hell and Back master that used these same, or at least some of the same 6K source scans. And so these sequences are where this new 4K presentation is at its absolute lowest in terms of picture quality. Because you have certain sections, particularly most of all the section on the float where our three characters swim up, have the sort of love triangle infighting of a screwball comedy floating in the water. That's where you have the most obvious example of switching back and forth almost between different sources or different masters. But there are other moments throughout the film where we suddenly switch to images that seem to have almost a sort of smoothed over or grain reduced look to them, which resemble more of that terrible 2020 Blu-ray. And then it'll switch back and forth between the actual seemingly the different sources they were working from for particular moments. And then there are some moments where it seems to revert back to what we saw more of on the 2012 Blu-ray that was derived from a newer interpositive that Paramount had made and not original materials. So it's a completely bewildering sort of patchwork effect. And there's been plenty of discussion online that this could be mixing and matching between different masters. At first I thought that was probably maybe going a bit too far, but then I looked at the disc myself and then I quickly realized it may very well be that, actually, or at least you mixing in some of the source files for those masters or something, because there are definite moments where we seem to switch to either a completely different source or an extraordinarily processed source, and it is very apparent when it happens. The float scene I mentioned in particular is the most obvious, but there are others scattered throughout, so it's not just an isolated incident, unfortunately. And this goes hand in hand with the inconsistent DNR that's used throughout the film. And so sometimes you have a scene that actually alternates between what looks like heavily processed, grain managed shots and shots that are much more left alone and have far greater detail, have a much better grain structure, even if they're probably not 100% left alone because Paramount can't leave anything alone. But that is where the transfer is at its most perplexing, where you literally have what seems to be switching between different source files of varying quality and varying processing levels. And this doesn't play well with the already inconsistent noise reduction that's used in this transfer, and the not very good compression, and the terrible and completely unacceptable frozen grain noise halos. But if you thought that was simply a new thing to Catch a Thief, unfortunately, the past releases exhibit those as well. The frozen grain noise halos are all over the 2012 Blu-ray, so unfortunately, that's not something you can escape when you jump back to that. And when you upscale that disc to 4K, it makes those and all the other limitations of that master more apparent. So that, again, leads back to the new 4K master being such a hot mess, because it is a distinct improvement in terms of overall detail and the nuances of the color timing as compared to the 2012 version. And I'm just basically skipping over the 2020 version because that's basically version 1 with crazy DNR of what we have on this 4K master, as they're coming from the same source files from that 6K scan of the VistaVision source. Again, hot mess is the term I keep coming back to, because there are positives here, but there are infinite amounts of negatives, none of which were necessary. All of these could have been avoided, and they weren't because it's Paramount. So I can't say that this is superlative or great or even good, because it's frankly unacceptable, especially for a Hitchcock title to have these kinds of problems, and a Hitchcock title that's had a history of problems on home video, all due to Paramount tomfoolery, not just now, but throughout home video. It's been handled different ways over the years, never correctly, never without problems or technical issues. So one would have hoped they would have finally gotten things right. However, I will say I am at least pleased that this isn't just a UHD of the should-be-burned 2020 master that we all wisely rejected, and Paramount, they basically acted like we were crazy. So we've all been watching the not very good 2012 disc all these years. And unfortunately here, that disc is still important for certain reasons, but even those are problematic because this film has never had a proper archival release, and it doesn't look like it's going to anytime soon. Again, the color timing is more nuanced and better than what we've seen before, but this film's had a variety of color timing appearances on the different formats. It's been handled in a number of different ways, some of which were flawed when they were done, such as the 2007 DVD that took a different approach, and they have said to have always used dye transfer Technicolor IP prints for reference, and they did do that again for this release. And I think also with the benefit of high dynamic range and the 4K medium, they were able to be more nuanced than before. I don't think it's necessarily perfect, but I do think it is an improvement, especially over the 2012 disc, which is really showing its age and again was based on a newer interpositive Paramount had made instead of original sources. So I do think the overall color timing is an improvement here. I don't know if I would call it perfect, but it is another inducement for picking up this release. The HDR is rather tastefully handled for the most part with Dolby Vision. There are one or two moments that are a tad on the bright side, but nothing seems to be really overdoing it, so thankfully this is relatively tasteful, although switching over to the HDR10 version, as is typical of Paramount releases, results in a much more compromised image due to the poor encoding of the disc. So if you don't have Dolby Vision, you are basically getting an immediate downgrade being stuck with the HDR10 layer, but that's how all Paramount UHDs are. Basically, it's Dolby Vision or nothing, because you're going to see a significant downgrade with HDR10, sort of not having the Dolby Vision layer filling in some of the Paramount gaps. And as if to perhaps validate our sort of theories that maybe Paramount was mixing in elements of other masters, this is not a pristine restoration either, because there are a noticeable amount of specks and debris that pop up throughout this 4K master. I noticed a good number of them, which I didn't expect, so that was surprising. And they were also, it wasn't like they were just in the lesser sections that might be from older masters. They were actually throughout this transfer. So whoever did the I guess the cleanup pass on the files that they then used for this new master obviously didn't get everything, and these just slip through. So there are a number of specks and tiny bits of damage that will flash by. And again, it's kind of odd, and it's very sad that these slip through what is supposed to be a top-of-the-line restoration for a premium release, which it definitely is not. So I think that kind of goes along with this being sort of a new version of pre-existing files. So do expect to see, in addition to all the other visual problems I highlighted, a number of specks and debris that will sporadically come through the transfer. They are there, obviously not all the time, but you will see at least several specks and marks that are very small throughout the entirety of the transfer. Of course, To Catch a Thief has a number of inherent visual issues that are just part of the film. There are a number of dupe shots, particularly getting in and out of the transitions to the beautiful helicopter footage, and so you're always going to have lower quality in those sections, plus any process shots in front of rear projection screens, and the infamous shirt that Cary Grant wears at the start of the film with the black and white stripes has wreaked havoc with basically every video master of this film ever. It's pretty notorious among even video engineers. Anyone who's handled this film or watched it on CRTs back in the day knows the particular issue I'm talking about, with the striped shirt causing all kinds of issues in terms of earlier video formats. Well, here it's even been admitted in some of the press release materials that they did use some noise reduction on the shirt to try and make it essentially play nicer. So they even knew that was going to be an issue here, but all that stuff is still obviously a part of the film and is just now a part of this new Paramount 4K master made from seemingly a variety of sources. So to try and do a visual summary of the overall picture impression, this is not what it should be. It is not fully representative at all of a VistaVision negative, let alone a Hitchcock VistaVision title, let alone the film that Robert Burks won his color cinematography Oscar for. It's like if any Hitchcock VistaVision film needs its visuals correct, it should be the one that his longtime cameraman won his Oscar for, and the one that is most of all about the splendor of the visuals of the French Riviera. So that's not helpful. I do think it is obviously better than the 2020 disc, because anything's better than the 2020 disc. It's obviously of a higher quality standard than the 2012 Blu-ray, which is itself based on a newer interpositive Paramount had made, and it's from a technically better source, but it hasn't been handled very well, and it's been processed in a number of different ways. So there are many drawbacks that are then topped off by a usual Paramount not so good encoding job that just makes everything worse. But worst of all, frankly, perhaps even worse than the random quality shifts, is the frozen grain noise halo problem. It is throughout the entire feature. Even just one instance of this is unforgivable on a Hitchcock title, let alone a UHD that's being sold as a premium product and a restoration. But to have it consistently throughout, and on top of the seemingly random application of digital noise reduction and grain management, and the seemingly random switches to lower quality process shots that are probably from different source masters. You have a transfer that can look very good to great to suddenly not good to suddenly passable to suddenly once again not good. And it just goes back and forth everywhere. And even when it's at its best, it's not where it could be with a properly hands-off archival transfer that had a brand new workflow throughout and didn't have anybody messing with it, and then had a proper disk encoding job. So, unfortunately, the Paramount problems rear their ugly head again and mar what is already seemingly a processed and messed about with 4K master that's from mostly already pre-existing source files. But again, it's a hot mess, so it is better than what we've had before. It's better and worse at the same time. So yay, Paramount. Thanks again for another screwy picture presentation. There's another $40 I had to blow on this I didn't have to spare. So with all of the picture problems out of the way, we then turn to the audio presentation, and one would hope that there wouldn't be the same level of problems. There's even more problems. Because unfortunately, this release only has a 5.1 upmix of Paramount's stereo remix from the past home video releases. So there is no form of the original mono mix on this disc at all, nor is there a presentation of the film's Perspective stereo track, which it had on the premiere engagements, and is even referenced in Dr. Drew Casper's commentary on this release. So there is no form of original audio on this release at all, which is an immediate failure in my book, and a gigantic red flag. For a Hitchcock title to not have any form of original audio is a major video sin. It unfortunately has happened on a number of titles before, but now even North by Northwest has a new transfer with its original mono mix for the first time since 1996 on the new Warner UHD. But to drop any form of the original mono mix is an unforgivable sin. And on top of that, there's been nothing said about ever doing a restoration or presentation of the alternate perspective stereo mix, which itself is a fascinating format that deserves to be better known and better preserved. And there are only a few examples we have in terms of what's available on physical media releases to experience a form of one of the important sound milestones in cinema sound's development. And perspective stereo itself was an interesting form of a steerable multi-channel basic surround setup in a sort of 3-channel system with control tones that would then move the sound around accordingly. So this is a film where it really would benefit from having that perspective stereo track if it still exists. But at the very least, it should have its original mono here in some form. All we have is this lossless 5.1 remix. And as I said, this is actually an upmix of the stereo remix that they made that actually was done back in 2007 for the 2007 Special Collector's Edition DVD release, which itself had some issues. Now, at first I wondered if this stereo remix was actually based on the Perspective stereo. I've wondered that for a great number of years, but unfortunately no one's ever said anything. However, when you compare it to the mono mix, you can tell very clearly that the stereo music itself is of much higher quality, almost as if it had been slipped into the mono stems. So it very much sounds like a tasteful remix, but a remix nonetheless. It's not integrated in the way that an original track would have been. It's also got a sort of 3-channel spread to it when you listen to the original stereo version, which again made me think that perhaps it was based on the Perspective stereo.
But when you compare the two tracks, there are also a number of slight changes and additional sound effects only found in the stereo remix. So I am very positive that it is a brand new stereo remix that was done in 2007 with additional noise reduction and processing applied, as it does have some notable sound effects that are not part of the original mono mix. And so it's been my best educated guess that it's merely a studio video era stereo remix of the film. However, this track has now been upmixed to 5.1 on modern releases, and what this has done is to basically add surround ambiance to the stereo track, but here they've also added a lot more presence into the low frequency effects channel. Essentially, in certain bigger moments, most of all in the climactic party sequence during the costume ball, there's a lot of ambiance thrown into your subwoofer in an attempt to sort of fill out your room. However, this is a film that was never mixed for that, so it does try to modernize the sound a little bit. And that, along with the added surround ambiance and the few additional sound effects and the very stereo music clashing with the center-locked mono dialogue, it just doesn't really feel like a 1955 audio track anymore. And again, this is a 5.1 up mix tweaking the 2007 stereo remix, and each of these have had successive amounts of noise reduction applied to them compared to what came before. And then we look at just the history of the mono mix, which has had that throughout, and so I had to get a variety of different issues, and ironically, the bargain bin copy final repressing of the VHS before the film was remastered for the first DVD release in the early 2000s. I have this 1996 copy of the film on VHS, obviously not in the original aspect ratio, and obviously the final pressing of the late 80s, early 90s VideoMaster, which is still using seemingly the same source as the 4x3, not the greatest 1982 Laserdisc that only has a noisy analog mono track. Well, these two basically use the same audio source, except the VHS rendering doesn't have the high-pass filter of the 1982 Laserdisc and is cleaner and fuller bodied. And of all the versions I've tried, including all of the DVD releases and up to the 2012 Blu-ray, because that was the last version to ever include a form of the film's mono, this bargain bin, not the best condition 1996 tape copy in terms of the hi-fi mono track, is the best sounding version of To Catch a Thief I've found. That's just ridiculous. So even though the 2012 Blu-ray still had a version of the mono mix, it was a rather processed version that didn't sound as good as past releases. And basically from the end of the VHS run of To Catch a Thief releases, basically starting with its initial remastering at the start of the DVD era, that's when we've seen successive amounts of noise reduction and processing apply with each new release. Except then in 2007, they also made a stereo remix, and now they've let the stereo remix take precedence by upmixing that to 5.1 and doing away entirely with the original mono mix. But the fidelity difference comparing the 1996 tape I have to the 2012 Blu-ray iteration is night and day in terms of dynamics and fidelity. So now I have to try and track down a much better condition earlier tape copy from the late 80s or early 90s. Plus, I also would like to track down the very rare and tough to get Japanese variant in terms of the Laserdisc releases from the early 90s, which had a quiet run of digital audio represses that added a PCM mono soundtrack to all of them, including some not part of the Universal library, including To Catch a Thief. But of course, those are expensive to import and ship to the US, but this is what I have to do. Thanks, Paramount. So in short, while I think there are definite pluses to the new picture transfer, but with a ton of minuses and negatives and drawbacks and concerns I have, the audio is a complete failure. There is no form of original audio, and this is a Hitchcock title. You don't do that. The fact that they couldn't even be bothered to, at the very least, port the heavily processed mono track that was on the 2012 Blu-ray is in and of itself a sign of the fact that Paramount doesn't care about audio. So here we have a more modernized remix of a modern remix, both with additional degrees of noise reduction and processing applied to them. In terms of the artwork and packaging, this is part of the annoyingly overpriced Paramount Presents line, so it has the same style of slipcover, which of course is the same stupid slanted slipcover that is always shipped and sold like this. So it always looks like it's damaged before you even take the shrink wrap off. However, it has the usual sort of fancy high gloss finish with almost a sort of foil effect to it. And they have nicely used the 2007 Special Collector's Edition DVD artwork, which is one of the best of the home video covers. It's basically the best cover they've ever had outside of using a form of the original poster art as the original video releases did. So that's what we have here instead of some generic, terrible looking modern piece of junk that Paramount has done for some of these Presents releases. So it seems very hit or miss what they will use for these. And then these are done in limited numbers, so then they sell out, and then we all sort of panic buy them and worry if we're ever going to see them in print again. And then shortly after, Paramount will announce a less expensive standard case version that usually has original poster artwork, as if they're just trying to screw with us. Yay, Paramount. Of course, with these, the idea is that you open the flap and get a reproduction of the original poster art. But because this is slanted and this is just a flap, it's always at an angle. So you set the case down and you're supposed to look at it like this. This is a stupid design. It doesn't work. It's not effective. Every one of these I've seen, it doesn't work. All you had to do was put the poster art on the front. And frankly, we don't even need a slipcover because it adds too much to the already inflated price. But if you were going to use the poster, why wouldn't you use it for the artwork? And also, if you notice, the actual rendering of the poster, it does seem to be a bit saturated in the oranges and yellows. So I've seen this poster printed in a number of different ways, but even when you compare with the 1982 Laserdisc, you can see the color difference. Even though the Laserdisc jacket is only using a portion of the artwork, you can see already sort of what I'm talking about. So unfortunately, the print quality on this rendering of the iconic one sheet is not the greatest. So this doesn't help. On the rear, we have a rather generic rear cover with the usual Paramount blurbs. Of course, the infuriatingly silly blurb about the Paramount Presents line being the utmost in audio-visual fidelity, which it is not at all. And then at least a little bit of the extras are listed along with the basic information. We have the same sort of foil gloss shiny finish on the back, but obviously the rest of the information is on the actual disc rear. I'll also say that, again, they have used the 2007 artwork, but they have actually added the classic VistaVision logo on the front, which seems like an odd move because they don't really respect this being one of the iconic VistaVision films by giving it a perfect, beautiful restoration and hands-off transfer. So that kind of pours salt in the wound. Plus, they're putting the VistaVision logo on the 2007 artwork, and that doesn't go together. And also, the way they've done it, the VistaVision logo just kind of blends into Grace Kelly's arm. So it's just an odd move, but, you know, I'm happy the logo is here, I guess, but it just feels really weird. This being a Presents title, we have the Silver Presents spine, which of course is slanted because the slipcase is slanted, and then the spine number because they're pretending this is a premium line and charging premium dollars for it. But this is spine number 3 because this takes the place of the 2020 crap Blu-ray disc they want you to forget. This should have at least been spine number 3.5. We want you to forget the 2020 disc, but we'll never admit how bad it was. Buy the film again.
Paramount.
Remove the slanted defective slipcase, and we have the same artwork on the case itself, a clear case as all Presents titles do. The rear is, of course, the same, except now we have a little bit more in terms of imagery, so it doesn't look as plain and generic, and then some of the supplements listed. Inside, we have the Presents aesthetic using a collage of different stills that are tinted with a randomly selected quote, and then the disc label done in the new Paramount style, with the bottom half being a plain black label. Of course, as you can see, this is a UHD disc only with digital copy. There is no Blu-ray included, which frankly for the $40 price tag, that is ridiculous. There should be an SDR Blu-ray disc. And with it being Paramount, there's always a chance the SDR Blu-ray disc is better encoded than the UHD because Paramount likes to do backwards things like that. So here is the inside of the case with the disc removed. And it looks fine enough, although it's kind of odd that they gave this film the sort of sepia tone tint to the stills used, but it's at least passable. But obviously, there are so many beautiful color images you could use or production stills that this is probably not what I would have gone with, but it is in keeping with the Presents design. To discuss the supplemental features, these are all legacy extras. There isn't anything new, which is frankly silly. You'd think that anybody would be more than willing to contribute extras to a Hitchcock title release, but we do have the one extra from the 2020 should have never been released crap Blu-ray, and that was a very brief Leonard Maltin introduction in the style that Paramount's had him do for some of their Presents titles. So it's nice to have Maltin introduce the film basically with some basic info, but it doesn't add anything if you're already a Hitchcock fan or a fan of this film. So that is at least ported over to have that extra. Everything else comes from the 2012 Blu-ray, but really it mostly comes from the 2007 Special Collector's Edition DVD, the 2002 original DVD release, and also the 2009 Centennial Collection 2-disc DVD release. So these are all extras produced at a different time. Almost all of them are in standard definition, so they're having to be upscaled here. They are very noisy and representative of being made throughout the 2000s. Obviously, the newer ones will be fancier and were done in 1.78 or 16:9, so they will fill your screen, but honestly, they are a bit noisier here than they were on past releases because they've just been tacked on. They haven't been retransferred or upscaled or anything. And they'll also show the transfer clips of the respective masters those extras were made for. So you will at least get a basic idea of some of the varying color timing approaches this film has had on home video in the past if you don't own any of those or haven't experienced them and you're just looking at this UHD release. So it's kind of fun to look at for those. In terms of the supplements themselves, the overall most solid ones are the ones for the original DVD with a complete making of documentary that is the best overall discussion of the film's production, overall reception, release, and legacy, and where it falls in the Hitchcock canon. But all the extras do cover a nice amount of material. So it's great to see that mostly all of them are here, although one would have wished they had been spruced up a little bit in terms of how they're presented. There is one extra, I believe, that's dropped from the 2012 Blu-ray, which is a brief piece about the locations. So unfortunately, that's the one loss in terms of the newer extras. However, there were a pair of commentaries made for this film on various Paramount releases. First, on the 2007 DVD, was a combination track with Peter Bogdanovich talking with the documentarian and Hitchcock expert Laurent Bouzereau. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, so I do apologize. But he was responsible for most of the Hitchcock DVD era documentaries and is one of the biggest, most famous names in home video features and film documentaries. And of course, Peter Bogdanovich needs no introduction and personally knew Hitchcock over an extended period of time. So it's honestly an engaging track. They have a discussion. It's very informal, and while it may not always be as full of technical tidbits or tidbits about the specific film's production, it's well done, and you do get, I think, some greater insight into Hitchcock's own views on the film and where it sort of places in the overall Hitchcock canon. And then later, we saw a commentary by Dr. Drew Casper, who is, of course, no stranger to Hitchcock scholarship and has done several Hitchcock commentaries among many other film commentaries. His track is solid, but his tracks also can be a bit on the dry side, and unfortunately, for me, this is one of those that is on the drier side. I also think it doesn't have all that many new bits of information about the film that you wouldn't have if you were already a fan and had watched the making of documentary or at least read the chapter in Hitchcock Truffaut about To Catch a Thief. You know, there's some analysis here and there that's solid or spot on, but it's not a commentary track I really return to, and honestly, of the two, it is far less engaging because Casper's commentaries, they either hook you with their energy level in terms of a specific track, or your mind kind of wanders as you listen to it. And that's how I feel with this one. So actually, I think the earlier commentary from 2007 is actually maybe a little bit more enjoyable to listen to. But I do like that Casper talks specifically about the film having a perspective stereo track, which we don't have a form of here. And we also don't have the original mono now either. So the commentary is actually kind of highlighting how the audio is a problem. Yay, Paramount. Except when you look at this UHD release, and frankly, all the modern releases, you only have one commentary. Only the Casper commentary is on this UHD, and it was the same situation on the 2020 Blu-ray from Hell and the 2012 Blu-ray. So for whatever reason, the 2007 commentary remains exclusive to the older format releases. I don't know why this is. There shouldn't be any licensing issues in terms of the people recording the commentary in 2007 did it for Paramount. It's not like it's a different cut of the film and the commentary wouldn't match. I don't get why they always leave out the 2007 commentary, but they do. So thankfully, before I got rid of my old copy of the film, I actually made a backup copy of the commentary, because even by that point, they had gotten rid of it. So if you want the other commentary for the film, you have to hang on to your old releases on DVD, or you have to track those down. It's not the most sensational track in the world, but it is very enjoyable. So why it continually gets left off is a mystery to me. I would think it would be a more appealing package if you could put on there it has 2 audio commentaries instead of just one. And this is a UHD. It's not like they need the extra space because they have to put on a ton of foreign language tracks because this is a DVD or a Blu-ray and they can only accommodate so much. You've got a huge amount of disk real estate, and you've already got a master that's not encoded well, so you've got the space. Everything else is a standard definition legacy supplement, so just include the 2007 commentary as well, but you didn't, again. So you do have to track that down on past releases, and it is a solid commentary. So unfortunately, once again, the legacy supplements here are incomplete, with a enormous omission of the 2007 audio commentary track. And then finally, the extras close out with an HD trailer presentation. This is an original trailer transferred in HD for presumably the original 2012 Blu-ray or even before that. So it's unfortunately not encoded very well. It's a bit noisy, has some macro blocking and other things, but like Once Upon a Time in the West and some of these other Paramount 4K masters, the old HD scan of a trailer is actually more natural feeling than the 4K master itself. Yay, Paramount. So if you want to get an idea of what more of an as-is, hands-off presentation of To Catch a Thief could resemble, I think you can look at this 1080p trailer on the disc and at least get a feel for some of the images and even some of the aspects of the color timing, and just to get an idea of what a hands-off iteration could look like. It's obviously an old trailer. It's not meant to be a perfect reference, especially in color, but at least it does give you a different frame of reference if you just have this 4K master. And frankly, I think it looks more natural than the 4K master. So this is another Paramount disc that has this particular phenomena that's quite unsettling. So to summarize all of this overall, this is a hot mess of a 4K master. This is a hot mess of a UHD. Yes, it's obviously better than the 2020 disc that should have never been released in that form, and a disc that we shouldn't have had to wait 4 years for Paramount to address their tomfoolery. And yes, this 2024 4K UHD is better than the 2012 Blu-ray, but it has so many new issues or exacerbated issues that weren't in the 2012 Blu-ray that one kind of refers back to the 2012 Blu-ray as being sort of like the old type of Paramount problems, and the 2024 is the new Paramount 4K problems of what they exhibit now in the 4K realm and the new sort of mentality in their catalog department. So while the 4K UHD is obviously an improvement in picture and color, it's also filled with so many drawbacks that a lot of that positive improvement is actually negated or certainly held back to an incredible degree. And then you have that sort of feeling of it being a patchwork affair in the quality loss moments, and then the inconsistent but applied throughout the feature DNR and grain management usage that is absolutely unacceptable. But then most of all, the frozen grain and noise problems that persist through the whole transfer are unforgivable. That is just a sign of this being a product and a master that is not what it should be, and something that's not being done to a high quality standard. You should not see one instance of that in a UHD, let alone a Hitchcock VistaVision title. I mean, that hurts, you know. And then we turn to the audio side of things, where there's no version of the original mono mix, regardless of it being a modern, over-scrubbed and over-processed version. And there's also no version still of the Perspective stereo track. All we have here is a lossless 5.1 remix of the 2007 stereo remix, which already had noise reduction in addition to the previous work done on the mono track. And this 5.1 iteration has more processing and noise reduction than the 2007 stereo remix that already had processing and noise reduction. So they've basically made the audio problems worse and then removed any form of original audio track whatsoever. So for me, the audio is a complete failure. And again, the stereo and 5.1 remixes do modernize the track a bit. They do spread the sound out a bit, but they also add some new sound effects, as if to imply that Alfred Hitchcock and the sound production team didn't know what they were doing in 1955, and Paramount must go in and improve upon certain elements. Yay, Paramount. Of course, they could actually come out and say what the source of this was, or that perhaps they unearthed the Perspective stereo track and used it for these remixes. So then it's basically a newer version of the Perspective stereo. Then we'd actually have something to go off of. But we don't have any information, so all I can do is look at the specific moments of new sound effects and the overall less effective mixing in comparison to the mono mix, and conclude that this is Paramount remixing their remix that already had overprocessing applied. And in terms of the 5.1 upmix itself, I don't think it's as good as the 2007 stereo remix, because the added atmosphere of the surrounds and the added LFE enhancement just makes the track feel obviously even more modernized. So if I had the choice of remixes, I would stick with just the 2-channel stereo remix, which sounds fuller and better and does hide some of the modernizing more. Then we look at the supplements, which add nothing new to the table. All of them are legacy extras. Not one of the standard definition extras has been re-encoded or anything. And once again, for whatever reason, the 2007 commentary isn't here. So this is an incomplete legacy extras section. This is all topped off by it being in the Paramount Presents line, which means you have to pay the premium $40 price tag, and it doesn't include an SDR 1080p Blu-ray, so this remains locked to UHD, and so people who can only playback Blu-ray are left out once again. And this is basically trying to market itself as a premium boutique label style release, which it isn't. This is another substandard Paramount release. It is another extremely problematic release of To Catch a Thief, which has had nothing but problematic home video releases. It has no form of the original audio mix, which is sadly at its best on an old analog master dating back to the early 1990s. It doesn't have the Perspective stereo track. It has a remix of a remix and an overpriced price tag, all for a silly, flimsy, slanted slipcover nobody asked for. So at the very least, one would hope that this disc had a proper picture presentation, or at least even a proper disc on code, but it's Paramount. That's asking too much. So unfortunately, this is another overpriced Paramount Presents release that is masquerading as a premium title, and really all it's presenting is another release full of Paramount's continual tomfoolery. So it's better than what I thought it would be, thank goodness, but that's not saying much, because the last release was the 2012 Blu-ray that should have never been released. It was so bad. So Thankfully, this is an improvement over that, but I would advise to hang on to past releases for those elements, most of all for the original mono mix, but to get a better sounding mono mix, you have to jump back to the analog video era, and specifically, you have to jump back to, unless I can get that Japanese Laserdisc and test that, you have to jump to VHS Hi-Fi. Oh boy. Yay, Paramount. Ultimately, I would suggest waiting to pick up this title on sale, or it is probably going to be discontinued very soon, and then Paramount will reissue the film in a much more affordable non-presents release, and probably again annoyingly give that release original poster artwork just to pour salt in the wound, as they like to do. When Paramount announced this UHD release, I was terrified that they were just going to reissue the 2020 monstrosity, but now put it on a UHD disc with Dolby Vision. And while thankfully they haven't done that, they've done all kinds of other stuff. So this isn't what it should be. It's better than what we expected, but it is a hot mess. It has improvements, but it has downgrades aplenty. And because no prior release is perfect or without issues, frankly, you can't just have one. You have to have at least several different ones to have different aspects, all the supplements, and the 2007 commentary, and the best version of the mono mix. And then you have to cobble together your own fan-made disc to try to have everything. But even then, you're stuck with the new 4K master on the UHD that has new issues of its own and seems like a patchwork affair in areas, and has plenty of the dreaded Paramount management throughout. So had this been done by somebody else, we wouldn't be talking about those, but it's a Paramount release, and you frankly have to expect that on everything the studio label touches. So as always, I hope my babbles about the iconic works of Hitchcock and their physical media releases, even when they're screwy as heck like this one is, has been at least somewhat fun and informative. I hate to have such disappointing news, but this was a very frustrating and disappointing watch. It is an improvement, thank goodness, over the 2020 Blu-ray, and it is an improvement overall from the 2012 Blu-ray itself, but it's not a slam dunk either, and it's not what it should be, and it's certainly not what it's being marketed as, and certainly not worth the premium price tag they've placed on it. There hasn't really been any effort put into the back end in terms of the actual disc release or even trying to make new supplements or do anything. So that and losing any form of original audio is frankly why I think hot mess is the best way to describe this release. So as always, please do keep supporting both studios and boutique labels when they do make great releases that show a sign of care, which Paramount seems incapable of doing. But in any case, when you do support labels and studios by buying films on disc, it does help to keep both physical media and film culture alive. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching. Yay, Paramount.
Pull me up! Don't shout, it makes me nervous. Then drop me! Whatever you say, you've got a full house. Begin the performance. What performance? Tell them when it's really on the UHD. Please, I might sleep. I can hold you for a few seconds. I did it for my studio's stupid film processing directives. That's fine, but I already know. Tell them down there. I kill you when I get up there. Tell them. I was working for the Paramount Restoration Department. So this is where you live. All this unprocessed physical media and research. Paramount will love to restore it all.